Integrated reasoning two-part analysis questions of the verbal kind. The first thing I'll say is the critical reasoning and reading comprehension skills you have already learned will be a huge help on these questions. Don't think of these as completely new questions. The format is a little bit different, but the fundamental verbal reasoning skills are the same as those other questions. So let's take a look at this type. In this type, you'll have a paragraph, not unlike, say, a critical reasoning argument, paragraph argument. Then you'll usually have a separate paragraph where the question is stated. You'll have the answer choices at the top of the columns. Those are usually abbreviating the question. Usually the column headings themselves are not sufficient to make sense of what the question is asking. You have to actually read the question. Then, of course, the answer choices. So to give you a sense of the variety of this question, I'm going to show you examples of question stems and what the column headings would be, just to give you a sense of the kind of variation here. So for example, the paragraph could be any argument. Then we have a prompt question. Indicate which statement in the table the given information most strongly suggests is true and which it suggests is false. So here it's really like we just have two side-by-side critical reasoning questions. We have to figure out one thing that is suggested is true and one thing that is suggested is false. And of course the columns just say true and false. So again, this question would just be like two critical reasoning questions side by side. There's not much interrelationship. Here's another example. Indicate in the table which cause and effect sequence would most likely, according to the astrophysicist, result in the formation of terrestrial planets. So apparently here we had a prompt paragraph, an astrophysicist telling us something about how planets form, that sort of thing. So we have to identify one thing that would be a cause and another thing that would be an effect of that cause. So notice that here the two columns are much more interrelated. What effect I pick probably is going to depend in part on what cause I pick. So keep in mind, sometimes the columns will be interrelated, sometimes they won't be. And that's something very important to figure out. Another example. The economist suggests that a certain type of prediction can be made on the basis of an economic system having a certain characteristic. Indicate in the table the possible prediction and the characteristic. So here presumably we had a prompt paragraph. The economist was telling us something about making predictions in economies, so describing some kinds of characteristics of economies, and this is true for this and this is true for that. And we have to identify one characteristic of economy and then the prediction we would make based on that characteristic. So again, a very strongly interrelated kind of question here. Finally, select statements 1 and 2 as follows. The lawyer would likely disagree with statement 1, and the homeless advocate would take statement 2 to present logical support for statement 1. So here apparently we have a paragraph that presents a disagreement between a lawyer and a homeless advocate, and we have to pick two statements. Statement number 1 is going to be something that the lawyer doesn't agree with. Statement number 1 is something that the homeless advocate would agree with and would support with statement number 2. So again, this is a very interrelated kind of question. And notice here, the column headings are just 1 and 2. They give us absolutely no information. We have to read the prompt question to figure out what's being asked. So overall, read the question stem and column headings. Look for words like assumption, conclusion. In other words, the ordinary critical reasoning analysis of questions. Read the paragraph. Identify premises, conclusions, assumptions. Identify the positions of different speakers, if applicable. Now, there may only be one speaker, but if there are two speakers, be very clear on what each one supports and what each one doesn't support. Consider carefully the interrelationship of the columns, if applicable. And again, this will not be always applicable, but if it does come into play, it is very important to consider. Notice I keep on saying if applicable, if applicable. This gives an indication of the wide variety of ways that verbal questions can be formulated in this type.